With the current mainline toys focusing on the 13, I thought that I might as well have a video going over them, as despite their importance to Transformers, they are mostly Ben Hasbro's totally cool OCs who play an important background role, with the odd show and movie giving a single member of the Primes some time in the spotlight. So in today's video, I'm going to go over the 13 Primes and how I can see them being used in a new story. But I will be closely over the ones that have already made an appearance in a show or movie, and might as well get them out of the way first. And with the first one we saw too, Alpha Trion, probably the most explored member of the 13, appearing in the very beginning of Transformers in the first show, even all the way to Transformers 1, being the old Autobots say to get him guidance alongside protecting Victor Sigma, the brain of Cybertron, and recently getting his relics, the Covenant of Primus and the Quill, that could change fate, for lack of a better wording, as whenever you use the two together, you can change the outcome of battles, for example. Since he is used so much, there really isn't anything else to go over, other than I think Ultron would be a great pick to be the only recurring character of a Transformers Authority show, where we explore snapshots of different periods in Transformers, with Alpha Trion watching in the background, journaling everything down. Next, the second most used member of the 13, the Fallen, or as they've been pushing him as recently, Megatronus. The first Decepticon and the reason why the Age of the Primes ended, either written to be pure evil or as an fallen angel, but he's always a major threat whenever he shows up, unless it is his own titled movie. The only wrinkle I can think they give the Fallen is that he's basically the Transformer God of War in my opinion, but after winning the fight against Unicron, entering a new age of peace under the Primes. But the Fallen couldn't really do much as they God of War because the other 12 wouldn't want wars to happen and would try to go down the peaceful paths, leading to a lot of resentment and anger. Eventually, the Fallen to join up with Unicron with his followers to start a war to end the age of the Primes. Next up, Vector Prime. From my understanding, he's more or less just his Cybertron self, character-wise whenever he appears in new stuff. Only really getting involved with the story if it means the end of everything, like the ever-expanding black hole from Cybertron. Which is how I also see him returning. If the Fallen and Unicorn were to be the big bads of a new story, that much evil returning to the galaxy would be enough for Vector Prime to come back. Onto Optimus Prime, and personally, I don't think he should be the bartender in Meganum, as whenever I hear alchemist, I think medicine. I even pictured this Prime being the god of medicine. That would even work for him wanting to walk amongst the mortals after the age of the Primes ended, helping them with their health, and not just adding to the misery in the bar. My bias aside, I can see him returning as Optimus Prime, just in his McAdam disguise if the galaxy needed him to return as a Prime. Like that what if story I mentioned with Victor Prime, like if the Fallen and Unicorn were to return, I could see that being more than enough reason for Optimus Prime to return to his Prime role to help save the galaxy one last time. Onto Micro's Prime. The TFWiki describes him as the heart of the 13, which makes me think of him as the Bumblebee of the 13, being very approachable, and his ancient nature believes his strong ethical sense, which makes me also think that Micro's might have been critical in the foundation of the Autobots, especially as a strong ethical sense sounds like what would become the Autobots' motto of freedom is right of all sentient beings. As for how I could see him being used in a story, the one I've been referring back to throughout this video, of the galaxy on the foot of the Fallen and Unicorn's return, so the Autobots having to find the remaining 13 members, which obviously would include Micronus Prime. Though I do think his appearance in the second Robots in the Sky show could also be a good template for how he could return in a new story. Onto the second to last spotlighted member of the 13, and the most recent one too, Quintus Prime. And while I never completed Earthspark, he was the 50th member to be spotlighted by it, and it is his science combined with his relic the Emberstone that gave Earthspark as a plot point with the Terran Transformers. There's also The Last Night, with its different take on Quintus Prime, Quintessa, as some of the combination of the Quintessons being the bad guys of Transformers, and Quintus Prime combined into one being. And honestly, that's all I can say about her, as he's Billy in her own movie, just like all the other Bayverse villains. And speaking of Quintessons, they're also where Quintus Prime gets his name from. And you know, I don't think it's stated in every universe reappears, but personally, I've always imagined Quintus Prime to be the creator of the Quintessons, as they were made to help him with his science experiments. And I do think also that Quintus Prime normally dies or disappears during the end of the Age of the Primes and the Fallen's War, and without his guidance, the Quintessons go mad, cannibalizing each other and transforming into the Quintessons we all know as a major threat to both Autobots and Decepticons. And possibly this could even be why the Quintessons have such entitlement over the Transformers, as since their creations of Quintus Prime, who is in turn a creation of Primus, that might give them enough logic to give them their entitlement to rule over Cybertron, and hence why the Quintessons also know so much about Transformer biology, as they were integral in the distant past of creating Transformers as we know. But circling back down to Crisis Prime, how could he be used in new stuff? After what Earthbug did, which seems to be aligned with his character. Using that unicorn and the fallen threatening the galaxy idea that I've been floating around in this video, them going around destroying the galaxy goes against what Crisis Prime stands for, which is, going by TFWiki, is that life should be encouraged to grow and thrive at all costs throughout the galaxy. I don't think it would take that much convincing from the Autobots to get Crisis Prime's aid if that is his stance. Lastly, for 13 members with screen time, Solus Prime. The Miss Event series really doing her an injustice, as I've seen some just write it off as the girl of the group, when Solus Prime is the blacksmith, and the one who made all of the relics the other Primes use, unless it's stated to directly come from Primus himself, like the Matrix is. Well, her screen time was brief. From what I gathered about it, Solus, she has a bit of a temper, and randomly gets paired up with the Fallen, even though all the Primes refer to each other as brother and sister. Personally, I would prefer if it was something the latter and just focus on Solus Prime being the blacksmith. Hell, Solus Prime being the blacksmith is very important to the story of Solus Prime, as for both fixing the Star Saber and Optimus Prime, Solus Prime's hammer was needed, alongside Megatron cutting off his own arm and replacing it with Lee's Maximal's arm, so he could use Solus Prime's force to make the Darksaber. Continuing with Solus Prime's story from my limited understanding of the end of the Age of the Primes, or what I normally call this era, the Fallen's War, Solus Prime normally dies, even being one of, if not the first, that dies in said war, as the first domino to fall that ends this era. Sometimes with a sword through the spark, other times being blasted by the Rectum Blaster, her own creation. I do think there's a way for Solus Prime to return, especially if her death in the story is through the sword through the spark, and not by the Rectum Blaster. By reversing the reason why the giants on Gigantia are continuously building up, it is because Solus Prime's force is at the core of their world, alongside her resting place. So if they're able to reignite Solus Prime's force, Solus Prime herself can get resurrected. Now onto the Primes that haven't been given the same spotlight yet, and what better one to start off with than the first of the Primes and the first Transformer, Primer, also known as Primer Prime for trademark reasons, I guess. He is the first to bend the Matrix and uses the Star Saber as his signature weapon. From what I gathered about him, Primer is basically a mixture of Octus and Rodimus Prime characterized, being the leader of the 13 and of 18 Cybertron, yet like Rodimus, he may have the Matrix of leadership to make him a good leader, alongside whatever benefits being a god brings him, but he's still the first. Learning what it even means to be a good leader too, and I can easily see Primer butting heads with Megatronus a lot over this, being a not so subtle foreshadowing for the downfall of the Primes. On to how to use them in a story set in modern times, a simple way being to just have him be the voice of the Matrix. G1 showed us that it's possible to enter some kind of mindscape to learn from and interact with past Matrix bearers, so Primer appearing in said mindscape sounds like a no-brainer, right? Especially if he died at the end of the Fallen's War with some of the other Primes. A different way I see him returning is in that Return of the Fallen and Unicorn story I keep referencing, with the Autobots traveling the galaxy to find the remaining 13 Primes to save it, with Primer obviously being there, or at least one of his relics, or even just someone worthy enough to wield the Star Saber. Next, might as well get Lee's Maximal out of the way, as his membership in the 13 sticks out like a sore thumb to me personally, as unlike everyone else who isn't the Fallen, Maximal is literally just evil, like pure evil. Why? Primus created the 13 to help him stop Unicorn, who is that pure evil. So why would Primus create another pure evil being? Plus, Primus is meant to be like the light to Unicorn's darkness. Would Primus even be able to create someone who is evil, at least intentionally? Plus, the moment of evil being amongst the 13 really undermines the Fallen personally, as it really lessens the impact of the fall of the Fallen if there was already evil amongst the 13. Personally, Lee's Maximal would work better as a fourth member of the 13. He's meant to be the trickster god, if you couldn't tell, so him pretending to be one of the 13 could work, especially if the identity of the 13th Prime is left a mystery. With Maximal out of the way, let's move on to a Prime I do like, with Nexus Prime, the first combiner. Nexus Prime was evolved with the old Transformers fan comics from my understanding, and mostly appearing in the original Shattered Glass comics too, even saving the day by returning to that timeline, randomly holding the Star Saber. In this depiction, Nexus Prime's components were scattered across the multiverse, and were obviously brought back together in order for them to combine back into Nexus Prime. He's also a major outlier with combiners, as unlike with every other combiner, like Defensor for example, Nexus Prime's combined form is his true robot mode, unlike said other combiners. I can see Nexus Prime working in one of two ways, firstly being his original depiction, or his components can fully transform, like a traditional combiner team, or he works like an energon and/or power core combiners, as in only the torso can fully transform, with the limbs only transforming between limb and vehicle mode. As for how Nexus Prime could return in a story, using that Fallen and Unicorn story I keep everything as a basis, one recurring thing that could happen in this story is that the Autobots and Decepticons racing to collect all of Nexus Prime's components, with the Autobots' goal being for them to have them combined back into Nexus Prime, with the Decepticons not wanting that to happen. With maybe even the little other twist being that secretly amongst the Autobots and or Decepticons, there actually is a component of Nexus Prime amongst them. Next up, Onyx Prime, the first of the beasts, and possibly the Transformers God of Death. I remember hearing that once, but TFWiki at most describes him as the most spiritually minded of the 13, plus his relic, the Triptych Mask? However you pronounce it, that mask allows Onyx Prime to soul project, to commune with someone far away, or even track a spark in the afterlife. So in a way, he is the god of death. Another thing I know about Onyx Prime is, despite his very intimidating appearance, he's actually a very friendly bot. Unless he's actually Shockwave in disguise at one time in the comics. But in the main story of the 13, Onyx Prime is actually injured and is placed into the Railroad box. Continuing on from Onyx Prime possibly being the god of death, I think here this is where this could become true, as he now separates the dead Transformers into the afterlife. Continuing on how he's a very friendly character, I would imagine that Onyx Prime will be the death as a friend interpretation, instead of the more common death as a threat interpretation. As for how he could return in the story, well, with the amount of times Optimus Prime has died and came back, I'm not surprised Optimus Prime hasn't already made an appearance on screen, other than the Blink animated cameo. But using the Fallen and Unicorn story as a different example, well, Optimus Prime is dead and being deaf, he can't actively help save the galaxy. But I can see the Autobot leader, whether that be Optimus or someone different, temporarily dying and meeting Onyx Prime. He tells him where to find one of his brothers or sister, or even the location of his mask, and brings him back to life, as it isn't their time yet to move on. Let's switch things up now with Amalcus Prime, the god of trains. Also, I'm pretty sure that they are also the canonical reason why Transformers are Transformers, as their ability to transform comes from them. Also, this is pretty just a headcanon thing, but since Amalcus Prime is meant to be constantly shifting and changing, I personally view them as being gender fluent, as the matters their theme of change. Though, officially, I've only seen Amalcus Prime being referred to as male, so just as my heads up going forward, as throughout the section, and whenever I do mention Amalcus Prime, that's how I personally will refer to them as. But getting back on track on to official Amalcus Prime stuff, from what I've been able to gather, they are pretty mysterious, as they don't tend to stay in one spot for too long, and they even just vanish at the end of the 13th story. Though TFWiki also describes them as a gentle, good-natured prankster and trickster, which also doesn't really help my feelings on Maxwell being out of place amongst the 13, as too overly fill in what he's meant to represent and be. As for how Amalcus Prime could fit into a story, other than the Amalcus Prime being tracked down to help save the galaxy from the Fallen and Unicorn, but also given the gentle, good-natured prankster and trickster part of their characterization, obviously Amalcus Prime could just show up in any random new Transformers story, purely just because they can, and wanted to change the scenery, as well as their curiosity on what has changed since they left space all those millennia ago. Caused a bit of mischief for the Autobots for an episode, also put a fear of God in the Decepticons as well, and then just as they had all their fun, they just leave, probably to the relief of Optimus Prime. And at last we arrive at the 13th. The member of the Primes time has forgotten. Only the other Primes know the true identity, and since they're gone, no one will ever know he's just Optimus Prime. Specifically, Battlestar Optimus Prime, or Star Convoy, as Battlestar is a Japanese exclusive line. Well, in hindsight, this makes Battlestar Optimus even more of a hype moment in the story, as this is him regaining his cartoon to save the galaxy one more time. But it also really makes Optimus less special alongside Optimus himself, as now instead of Optimus going from a commoner who rises to become the hero Cybertron and the galaxy needs, that's kind of tainted a bit by the fact that he only was once one of the 13, and becoming Prime just feels like Optimus regaining a bit of his power, for lack of a better wording. And Optimus is meant to be the chosen one. If Optimus was already once one of the 13, him becoming Prime is just far too similar to Optimus becoming Prime as well, as he's going to be chosen by Primus. But how could they use Battlestar Optimus Prime in a modern story? Well, Battlestar already has a way to bring back this version of the 13th. Going back to that story I keep referencing of the Fallen and Unicorn fighting the galaxy, that much power would be needed to save the galaxy. Like, if Optimus is the leader of the Autobots who dies in that story and meets Onyx Prime in the afterlife, Optimus could learn about his past godhood from Onyx Prime, and go with him on a journey to regain his godhood to save the galaxy. Now, those are all the canonical 13 Primes, and the ones who will or do have toys in the Age of the Primes toyline. But there are other extra members of the 13, as the roster only got this solidified in recent years, and since these extra members could make an appearance in the Age of the Primes storyline, as well as in some depictions, the lineup does change sometimes. Might as well go over a few extra members, or at least the ones that I personally put into my roster of the 13th. It would be a place to start with the biggest one, and my personal pick for the 15th Prime, the last Autobot. Also known as Optimus Maximus, he is the last Guardian in case of Primus' death. He was set up to take the plate once awakened by the Chosen One, and since he's silent behind Optimus Prime with the TFWiki, although I was paraphrasing, not missing Rotters at all. Rather than showing how quickly Rotters got shafted as the Chosen One, the last Autobot was also the design inspiration for the Ark's robot mode from the Kingdom, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hasbro releases the Ark as the last Autobot as a recolor for the Primes line. And how could it be used in a story? Like his only major appearance, I could see him awaken in the final act of a show, especially since I like the idea of Autonomous Maximus being the counterpart of the Fallen, who is the first Decepticon. The galaxy was put into chaos by the first turning evil, and the galaxy will be saved by the last guardian of it. Next up for the extra members, Logos Prime. TFWiki describes him as having the guardianship over logic and having the ability to take on any name and form he chooses. Although sounding like a mixture of Maximo and Adaptus Prime, Logos Prime also reuses Cybertron Sound Blaster for his design, a common practice for comic book exclusive characters at the time. Logos Prime even just goes by Sound Blaster too, so was he always evil as well? Nope. In the story Beast Wars Reborn, Logos Prime ran into the Beast of Time, and after the encounter and losing his objective, Logos Prime now describes himself as no more, leaving only a living corpse with a shattered soul awaiting imminent destruction. Often that sudden darkness aside, how could Logos Prime appear in a new story? I think it could be interesting if Soundmaster were to reappear again, to have him reveal himself as the missing Logos Prime, especially since Soundblaster's brief appearance in the War of Cybertron cartoon as a failed clone does share some vague similarities to Logos Prime's story, like he's a drifting warrior just waiting for the right opponent to give Logos the last duel he's been asking for. On to the last character was the newest edition of the extended 13 Primes, Zeta Prime. I bring Zeta Prime up as I think he's the perfect candidate to receive the Forgotten Relic from Armada, which would be to give Zeta Prime the perfect synergy with Primer, the Sky Boom Shield. While in Transfomers 1, Zeta Prime's signature weapon was the axe, but Opus claimed that as his own in G1, but so far no one has claimed the Sky Boom Shield. So, as I said, I presented Zeta Prime with the shield, literally being the shield to Primer's sword. While Primer charges at the enemy with the Star Saber, Zeta Prime holds the line with the unbreakable Sky Boom Shield, with his character reflecting that, being protection focused, caring for those who can't defend themselves. How could 13 Prime Zeta be used in a story? Well, I can see him going missing after tanking a major attack from the Fallen's war, and when he's eventually found, Zeta Prime is still behind his shield, needing an energon boost to be reawakened to once more defend the galaxy. And with that, we're at the end of this video. What do you think of the 13 Primes? Do you like the canonical setup, or do you wish one or more of the external members were chosen instead? But in any event, thank you for watching.
Prioritizing speed.